Hey guys, Steve here, Aquaponics. Today we're going to talk about
growing with fishes. Growing with fishes.
All right, well, we'll give that a little bit of time. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Marty, and if you're interested in the ferment, type that out in chat.
All right, so yeah, I'm AP Meds, and today I just want to talk a little bit about some different home grow setups. Let's see, let me get my screen share going. I was going to show you guys some more SketchUp stuff, but my program won't load, so that's been frustrating. I did load the web version where I do have one here that we can look at. So this is actually the 3D model of that I started in the free version of my current flower system. And so this is a great way when you're designing systems to just kind of see how things fit together. And for me, I mean, I do a lot of this in my head, I guess. So I can design systems in my head, but when I need to start communicating them to other people, it's a lot easier to be able to create a design like this and send it to someone just to be able to make that work. So I do have some other stuff here I'm going to show you guys that's been, let's see where to go. All right, well, I guess I won't. Okay, so anyway, this is kind of the basic model that sort of evolved over time. I'm going to switch over here and show you guys some pictures of kind of where some of this stuff started. This stuff that you see here is all my first year outdoor aquaponics grow. This is not dual root zone, but this was fed probably 3 to 4 times a week to be able to achieve this kind of bud formation. And this is Platinum Delight by Blue Power, I think it is. It was called Platinum Cookies. These are some soil plants that were put in that were fed with aquaponic water. So pretty similar to what you just saw from Josh, where we were kind of using the tank as more like a culture or almost like a brewer, and then we were feeding off of that. Here's more of the first grow, the first outdoor grow, I should say. I did a couple of small indoor grows before that. You can check those out on my YouTube channel if you want, at AP Meds. So again, here just kind of some examples. This first system here was set up a little bit different than the way that I do it now, but some of the things are still the same. The U-siphon that we talked about was all put together during this first system. This is the second evolution of the system here, where I built a shade table over the top. These are just half barrels with little dual root zone pots, so you can just kind of get an idea of what the setup was. So my water was getting pretty hot in the summertime, so I built this table to go over the top of it, kind of added it on. You can see there's a couple different kind of pots I was experimenting with. This is this black square one. This is just a round bucket. I think it was a 1 gallon bucket. So I just had different setups to be able to kind of experiment with what worked and what didn't. And that most of my home-based stuff you'll see has been pretty much that. Here's some indoor. So after this this outdoor run, I was shut down on outdoor. I wasn't really able to do much more on that. But here is the indoor stuff that I've done. This was kind of my first, like maybe serious indoor run with some bigger lights. Here's some more of the finishing up of the outdoor. So this plant here grew all the way up to the top of the gazebo. I want to say it was probably, like the plant itself was probably about 7 or 8 feet tall. And, you know, because it was a couple feet off the ground. So right here, this is probably about 12 feet. So just kind of give me an idea of how things sort of evolved over time. And as I made changes, got improvements. So here's some of the dual root zone. This is a Starfighter OG. All these are through here. These are more shots of aquaponics fed soil beds. So these are raised beds to do that. Take a peek at some of those. A little harvest picture there. So all this was great. Had really good luck with all of it. This was all done in dual root zone or in soil. You can see some more indoor stuff, some more beneficial bugs. This was a run of sub-irrigated planters that were fed with aquaponic water. So they weren't attached to the main system. They were just fed with the tank water. And this was a weird cross. I can't remember what it was. It was something like a peach frost by something. I don't remember what it was now. But it came out really strong, really fruity. I would say that the sub-irrigated planters fed with aquaponic water were definitely good quality. Everything was good about them. I just still prefer the aquaponics. Just seems to get a little bit more terpenes and flavor. Has a little different punch to it. Here's the kind of the really purple genetic expression that came out of one of those Platinum Delight plants. So here's just, in my opinion, is a great example of full genetic expression that you get from a microbial activity in an aquaponic system or living soil. This was definitely some of the better stuff. Here's the harvested peach frost by something, I still don't remember what it was. This is a sour, it was a really sour one. Sour strawberry, I think is what it was. Turned out really well. So I was definitely going through and feeding a number of different stuff to these. I've tried, you know, doing the sub-irrigated planters. Here is, this is shisky and I think this is Gorilla Glue. I've tried different lights. I have tried LEDs, I've tried ceramic metal halide. This particular run that we're looking at here is all cookies that was grown in with all ferments. So these were all grown dual root zone aquaponics and fed with a sour plum ferment and blackberry ferment, the two that were gone through here. So let's see, that was pretty much all this. So here's a good comparison. This is grown under LED right here, and then all of these down here, same cut, and then this is under ceramic metal halide down here. Same cut, same clone, off the same mom. Really, the main difference was the size, and could definitely be explained just because the LED was putting out a lot more power. So here's some nice gland pics. I know we've had a lot of talks about trichomes and stuff already, but these are taken with just a cheap microscope that you can buy off of eBay or Amazon. It was like 10 bucks, 20 bucks, plugs into your computer. And we've talked about them a lot, but this is the kind of detail that you can get to be able to take a look and see where your trichomes are. So here's how those finished up. I do think that there was a link between using the ferments and having maybe larger gland heads. I'm not sure if there's more of them, but these are some really well-developed trichomes. And definitely some of my more popular herb was this cookies right here. And you can see here's kind of how it finished up. Turned out great. Became super popular. Here's the ceramic metal halide, the way it finished up. It did take a little bit longer also. But other than that, this is a grape stomper down here. So you can just kind of see the evolution of my systems as we go through. This is the last one that I did before I moved. And then here is the new system when I built it out here at the new house. That's the same model that we were looking at over here on SketchUp. So you can see here's the, this model isn't finished because it's the older one. But here's the beds, they come out, dual root zone pots. This is the main fish tank over here on the side. It overflows into the media beds. The media beds have U-siphons that go down into the sump pump. So the pump sits down here and the sump pump pumps back up here to the top, and the fish tank then overflows back down. So I used the 3D model to set up my light pattern, kind of see what size my beds needed to be. I didn't do it exactly like this. You guys will see down here. I actually spaced this out from the wall a little bit, and my garage isn't exactly 20 by 20, but yeah. So this is kind of the beginning stages of when I designed it, and here it is in full fruition. You can see the media beds, dual root zone pots. This is pretty much in full flower. I think I had to pull a plant maybe in here somewhere, so it's not quite full. But just to give you give you guys an idea of what it looks like from start to finish, just sort of the original design all the way through to what it looks like in the end. So you can see my dual root zone pots in here. I feed these in the top. You can see, and then this is kind of all torn out now, but I did have a bunch of greens down in here. And generally, all these are full of microgreens or kale or buckwheat or any number of different leafy greens. So that is sort of what it looks like. Here's a row. So you can see I have just under 4,000 watts of ceramic metal halide. No LED in here yet. I do want to do that eventually. And in here, this is a great comparison video. This is one of Steve's favorite or comparison pictures. You can see this row here in the back is all been fed additional amendments, and this plant right here has been fed just castings out of the worm bin. So this one received, let's see, was langbeinite, rock phosphate in varying levels along this whole row. So I did, basically this one here is like a quarter dose. This one here is half dose. This one here is 3/4 dose, and this one out here is a full dose. So what I want to highlight here is how you can get multiple test runs or test plants with dual root zone inside of the same system. So if you're a breeder, if you're doing a phenotype hunt, whatever it is that you are trying to vary in order to get different results, the easiest way to do that is in a dual root zone system. Because each one of these plants can be different, as opposed to if you're dosing the entire system at one time, then all of these plants are going to be on the same nutrient dose, right? As opposed to in a dual root zone system, each one of these can have its own soil mix and allow you to test multiple things inside of a single run and speed up your process dramatically. So instead of, here, let's just count the plants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can have 12 different mixes going in one run that will last 3 months, as opposed to doing 12 different runs that will each one last that long. Could put you out a year just to be able to test the same stuff. Or have multiple systems, I guess, if you wanted to do it that way. You have to separate them out. So dual root zone gives you a huge advantage for any type of research that you want to do. If you're doing like comparison research, if you're doing phenotype research, genotype research, chemovar research, any of those things are going to be made easier and faster to do that. So again, this one here, definitely smaller, less of a yield. This entire plant pulled down just under 3 ounces. I mean, it was like right at 3 ounces. And the next closest comparison plant would be this one back here. And this one came out more than double that, with maybe, you know, a couple dollars worth of amendments, if that. So this is a great way to be able to test multiple things at one time, and just to give you an idea of, because I get this question a lot, was the reason that I did that. You know, what happens if you just do castings with dual root zone? Do you really need to amend the soil? And I guess the answer is you don't need to do it in order to finish, but if you want to get results more like this row as opposed to this one, then you know, it might not hurt to throw that in. So here's a closer up shot of the castings plant. I did notice that it did seem to have less bug pressure. I don't know if that really means anything to anyone, but yeah. All right, so now I think I'm going to switch over. Let's see if we got any questions about this stuff here. Oh, yep, looks like we do. Let me scroll up here. Were you feeding lacto weekly in the sips? Yes, I was feeding lacto by just adding a little bit of bokashi bran when I added the aquaponic water, and they were getting fed. They were pretty small sips, so they were getting fed every couple of days when they got bigger. So the larger your plant gets, the faster your water disappears in a sub-irrigated planter. So just be aware of that. Method of tomato.
So I think that's a great demonstration of why you want to grow with dual root zone, and brought up a lot of really good points on why, you know, the increase in control and the ability to do, you know, all these different feed rates at once, and then do one run and immediately dial in a strain rather than having to do a whole bunch of runs, really goes to show how superior it is, especially when you get to commercial production. It's just night and day.
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, that's just critical if you're trying to get faster. You can't, unless you're going to build multiple systems, 12 different systems for 12 different plants, then it's going to be a lot harder to be able to do that. What size pots do I use? That's a great question.
Looks like we lost Marty there. Marty will be back in a second. I was just checking our, trying to juggle, make sure all the different speakers and everybody are lined up through the different communication methods. I think he's cutting back to his other, is my audio not working? No audio? So my audio is not working? Check, check, check. Hopefully my audio is working now. Not sure what happened there. Okay, cool. All right, looks like Marty's back. Or I timed out. No, Marty's back. There we go. All right, not sure what happened there, but Marty is back on track. I know he's going to do a broadcast from his grow here in a second and show off his U-siphons, and he's a pretty cool setup for how to set up in a room where maybe you can't screw with the floor, which is a lot of you guys out there. So that'll be neat to show. I'm not sure what he's going to show us next.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
I think my internet went down. See if I can get my screen share.
We're experimenting some technical differences. To quote Idiocracy.
Right.
Since the rest of it came true.
So somebody was asking me what size pot to use. And I would say that I've used various sizes. Actually, in these pictures, there are different size pots. So here's my rule of thumb for the minimum, which is for every foot worth of plant growth, whether that's tall or wide, if you're doing a scrog like this, obviously this plant's only a couple feet tall, but it's grown out wide and folded out. So for every foot of plant growth, you want to have a minimum of a gallon of soil. So here we're probably 3 feet tall or 3 feet long in this case. So I would say you want a minimum of 3 gallons of soil. So you have to remember that your pot needs to be sized to the length of time and size of plant that you're gonna run. So that would be my recommendation. So anywhere from a 3 to 5 gallon pot for an indoor plant that's maybe only going to grow for a couple of maybe a month and then flower out. That would be my recommendation. So that would be definitely the minimum. You can go larger if you've got room. I don't think that I've seen any negative effects of it going, having too large of a pot. But I don't think that it's necessary for something that is going to be a smaller plant. So in this case, where I'm only growing it to a 3 feet tall and flowering it out, I'd say a 3 to 5 gallon. Do we have any questions while we're gone? Let's see. What percentage of the pot is soil versus rock? That's a great question. I did want to talk more about the root zone, so I'm actually going to switch over to my camera here and go to the whiteboard, because there was a little bit of confusion yesterday also on dual root zone pots I saw in the chat. So I'm going to try. Since SketchUp isn't working, I'm going to go old school over here to the whiteboard. So in my dual root zone pots, I set them down into the media bed. We have extra holes drilled in the bottom. You guys see that all right? Cool. Now, don't go too far up the side. So generally in a regular pot, there's already a hole that comes up, a couple of sides of the pot. And I don't go up higher than that usually. So in here, so this would be the media bed down here. And the important thing here is our water level. So if our water level in our media bed, I want to come up above our tallest hose. So your media in your media bed, we're just going to say it all the way up here to the top. Now I know sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, but your media is going to come all the way up here. Because even in a general aquaponic system, you got to have a couple of inches up here above your water line, so that the top of your media doesn't stay wet all the time just from evaporative wicking. So there's usually about 2 inches of space that you want between that. So in here, almost the same type of your media, or even a little bit above, if your water line is pretty close, you can do that. This is where you want your burlap layer. Up here is going to be soil. Your water level in here is going to be the same, right? It's going to come up to here. This part down here is going to be media. So this whole section here is going to be full of media, but only part of it is going to get water. When the water level fills up, it's going to come up to here and drain back out. So even inside your pot, you want about 2 inches of media between the water level and your burlap. So this space in here should stay relatively dry. You don't want it soaking all the way up here to your burlap, or else it's going to soak your burlap and it's going to wick right up into your pot. So if you, depending on your system setup, you can do this a couple of different ways. One thing that happens is if you have really deep media beds, this pot will start to sink down this way. As it gets heavier, it'll start to sink down, and this will start to sink down, and it can start to wick as your plants get later in flower and get heavier. And then if they start wicking, they'll get heavier also, and the problem just gets worse. So I've dealt with this a couple of different ways. The first thing I did to try and prevent it was I just put little cuts of PVC in here like this, just to prop them up. Which worked pretty good. I didn't really have a problem with it. As long as it keeps it up off the ground, it doesn't really matter. But when we go down to my system here in a little bit, you'll see what I did in my system is I actually added 2 pieces of PVC that go this way in my media bed, so that my pot can sit right down on top of them and not sink down. And it also gives me extra drainage from end to end on my media bed. Now this is a 2-dimensional drawing, so it doesn't look perfect. But just to give you an idea, these both sit down in here, they run parallel to each other. They're not hooked up to anything, they don't do anything besides just provide drainage and allow me to set the pot down on top of those. So any place in my bed, I can go through and dig down the media enough to find the top of these pipes. I know I can set it right down on top of it. It's going to stay there. And also the roots aren't going to block up the entire media bed. The water will be able to flow all the way from one end to the other without getting completely blocked. So that's a great way to keep all of your pots at the same height, keep them from sinking down too far, and help with your drainage to go all the way through from end to end on your media bed. Any other questions about dual root zones, Steve, before I erase this?
No, let me check chat here. Anybody have any other questions about dual root zone in chat? I know there's a lot of questions. A lot of people don't quite understand it. A lot of people think it's a wicking bed. It's not a wicking bed.
Yeah, so if you were doing a wicking bed, you would just extend this all the way down to your water, right? But in this case, we don't want to do that. We don't want it to wick. And the reason we don't want it to wick is the entire purpose of dual root zone to start with, which is that you can add amendments to the top, or what I either be a top dress is how I do it. You can do it be liquid nutrients, but you can create a concentration, a higher concentration of P and K. So when you have this higher concentration up in here, the whole point is to keep it out of the water table. So if you have a wicking bed, you can wick water and plants can grow in it, But what happens is that all the P and K starts leaching down into your water table, and it defeats the purpose of what you were doing in the first place. So you definitely want to make sure that this doesn't stay constantly wet and wick all the time, so that it doesn't leach all of the P and K that you're trying to keep isolated on this plant to do it. So in this case, you know, the plant's coming down here, the roots are growing down here, so it can get water. But these nutrients up here are going to be just for this plant. And these plants are going to grow, the roots are going to grow out in the entire media bed. Like when I pull my plants after harvest, the entire thing is just a mat. It's not like it's just going to be limited to inside of the spot. And that's part of the reason why we drilled extra holes, is to give it more root space.
So we had some more questions here. Do you add holes to the horizontal PVC pipes?
These ones here?
Correct.
I didn't consider doing that. If I did do it, I think I would do it right here on the lower part of the sides. But I
think I would go with like slits, maybe with like a chop saw, and make it like, rather than a hole, go with a slit so that you have more of a, you know, more area so that it doesn't get clogged as easy.
Right. And so what I did is I just have these open on both ends, and there's no holes in them, because it's just one big long media bed.
All right. Does a lot of roots accumulate in the media bed?
Yes, this entire thing right here, the entire media bed, if you leave your plants, you know, for longer than a cycle, even one cycle, which would be, you know, like 3 to 4 weeks of veg and 8 weeks of flower on average, this entire media bed will be nothing but a bed of roots. So generally what happens is everywhere except for this top layer just gets covered in that, because they'll light prune up here at the top. So they'll fill up everywhere that is dark, essentially.
And then how many inches of dry soil above the burlap?
Really as much as you can fit, I guess. Up here, if you have a taller pot, then you can put in more. But
I would say I wouldn't go with anything smaller than a 3-gallon pot at minimum.
Yeah, unless you were doing really small plants, like if they're only a foot tall and you're just flowering clones immediately, and you're doing like 1,000 of them, then I would say 3 gallon is probably the minimum. Any other questions?
So we have some more questions.
What's the gap between the gap between the pots and the tray? So down here, this would just be media. So in my case, I have a mix that's about 20% lava rock.
I'll shout out to Martin too. I met him at.
So that fills up full space down here, all around these pipes. We'll go look at it in just a minute too. Anything else, Steve?
Let me see here. Sorry, trying to juggle all these different things at once doing this. All right. If you have a larger rock area below the water line, does it increase the diaphragm action on the soil level? Yeah, so the more, as long as it was walled in on the sides, yes, absolutely, it would push a greater volume of air through that.
Yeah, and I think that brings up two great points. We talk about this all the time in the siphon, right? So as the water level comes up, it pushes out all the air that is been in the media bed already, fills it up, so it pushes that all out like a diaphragm pump. And then when it drains back out, all that air comes back in. Right anymore. So the water level drops back down. As it comes down, it sucks new air into all the root zones. And then the other advantage of this diaphragm action is that it pushes this air up when it comes inside of the pots. So you don't want a hole right here close to your water line, where instead of pushing air up through your soil zone, it'll push it out. It's probably not a big deal, but and even mine aren't always perfect. It's a lot better now that I have these in here to set them at a constant height. But the air pushing up will shove air through the top of the soil layer if you make sure that it comes up above the holes here on the side. So that's why I don't put too many up here on the side. I always put extra ones down, no taller than what the opening is already, which is usually about a half or an inch, depending on what size. But that the more area you have down here will give you more root zone space, and the more of that root zone space that takes part in that diaphragm action, the more access you will have to air. And I'm a big believer in siphon systems for this exact reason. I think that taking or giving plants access to air in the root zone, as opposed to putting all of your oxygen requirements on your dissolved oxygen. So both your fish and your plants are running off of the air in your water, is not as efficient. So I do think that whether you have a siphon system or timing system or whatever it is that you use to vary the water level, however you achieve that, I feel like it's necessary at this point. I'm not a fan of anything constant height I've seen produce or do anything good, and that goes for DWC also. I know it's super popular, and there are ways that you can adapt it. Like I know Steve has shown in his videos where essentially instead of this being a media bed.
Yeah, great chance to demonstrate this too. Go ahead.
Yeah. So our normal setup is what I just described, but one thing that we've run into repeatedly are specific aquaponic designs or systems, commercial systems that have been sold that are DWC, and they want to convert them from lettuce to cannabis. And so we just imagine this as a DWC bed, right? So now this is all water down here. This is the top. So here's our raft. So just imagine a little bit. So if we take a pot that instead of having little tiny holes and putting just a bunch of plants in here like we do with lettuce, we can re-engineer this raft to have a slightly larger hole. And then over the top of that hole, we put a dual root zone pot. So then the roots are growing down here in the water, and all of our soil is up here. The burlap separator goes closer to the bottom.
Yeah, and then oftentimes we'll even use a little layer of hydrogen, even 1 or 2 layers thick, right above at the bottom of it, just to help give an extra air layer there. You can get by without it, but it does help just after some experience doing it at scale.
Right. So this is a way that Steve's been able to adapt DWC for that, but it doesn't change a couple of things about DWC, which is that you still are going to share all of your air for the most part, other than what is in the top part of here. A lot of your air is going to be still going to have a higher requirement for dissolved oxygen than what you if you had a siphon system. And your water volume, the amount of water that it takes to fill up the DWC bed is going to increase the amount of supplement you have to add in order to achieve the ppms that you want for your plants. So if your water volume is less, then you're supplementing less at a time in order to get there. Any other questions on that?
Anybody have any questions on the dual root zone? Oh, here we go. Any interesting suggestions on how to separate hydrogen from the mass of roots for later reuse? I found the easiest way is just to take it, let it dry out, and then once it's fully dried out, you can just pull the top. Oh, looks like we lost Marty again, but I'm sure he'll be back in a second. But you can just pull the top off once they're dried, and where that burlap layer is really easily separated. You can pop it right off. And then you have that soil layer separated. Now you can compost that, amend it with some of your fan leaves, amend it with some of your fish waste, and amend it with some IMO, and get that, let it rest for a period of time, and then you can go ahead and reuse it, but you got to refresh it a little bit, right? And then we're going to take the hydrogen, and what we found is you can get, what's the name of it? It's kind of like the iron, the diamond shaped iron like you use for grading, like for floors or for like catwalks and stuff, like above like a power plant or something like that. That actually, you can get that in sections at the hardware store. And that actually works really good for separating the hydrogen and kind of holding the rocks, and not the rocks back, but separating the hydrogen, allowing that to fall through, but kind of holding the roots up for the most part through into the top of that. And you can even add a little bit of extra, maybe a layer of chicken wire over top of that to have something else for it to grab onto. But it really seems to be the easiest way to separate it in mass. But usually once you pull it off and let it dry out, I can hit that with some good microbiology, and I'm not too worried about eliminating that 100%, right? But with the microbes and everything else that we have in the system, it's going to recycle those nutrients and those leftover roots pretty fast and not really be a problem. Very similar to, say, like a natural living soil bed. We're basically growing aquatic soil, right? So that's what like Dr. Leonard was saying yesterday. It's more akin to a living soil bed, not a hydroponic bed, and we prefer to call it aquatic soil. Me personally, anyways, and the aquatic food web, because that's really, again, much more akin in terms of how it's structured and how it actually functions, is much more akin to soil. Is your mic working there, Marty?
I think so. Are we good?
Okay. Yeah, just making sure, just because you disconnected, reconnect, just making sure it's all good.
Oh yeah, I was just trying to get a jump start here on my
I have a gray colored lava rock in from prior owner from outside landscape. I'm wondering if it might be bad, like cinder blocks could be. Should I just use the red colored lava rock? So if it's actually gross stone, which it could be, gross stone's high in silica, but it can raise pH if you have too much of it and if it's not been aged a little bit. But it can be a great way to passively add silica, but again, without seeing it, it would be hard to give you an honest statement. Red lava rock is often stained, so that would be my concern. Make sure it's actually red lava rock and not stained lava rock.
Also, just so you know, like, I know that a lot of people ask about lava rock and like just end up going to like Walmart or Lowe's or something to purchase it, and it's just really expensive there. It's not necessarily you can't use it, but if you look at like landscaping places, you can usually get like an entire yard of it for a lot cheaper than you can buy it by the bag. So
I was gonna say, you can usually get super sacks anywhere from 180 to 300 bucks, depending on where you are in the country and your local access to it.
So just, I mean, you can do that. If that's the only thing that you got, then I understand. But besides that, it's just really expensive. So that's my tip, especially if you're going to need a lot of it. I wouldn't buy it like a few bags at a time. Okay, so I'm going to move on here to U-siphons here for just a minute. And again, I apologize for my terrible artwork here, but hopefully we can at least get the concepts down. So we talk a lot about bell siphons, and we use them a lot in aquaponics. Those are usually mounted here inside the media bed. And then they just have a normal drain that goes out. With a U-siphon or a loop siphon, either one of them, we're using the same principles that we have for a bell siphon, and then we're creating a siphon with a restriction that fills up to a particular water level. So in this case, when we use a U-siphon, as opposed to it being mounted inside the bed, I generally choose to mount them on the outside. Now you can, if you just Google U-siphon, you'll see models that go inside, but I like using the remote U-siphon better because you get to, which you can do a remote bell siphon, by the way, also. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I like being able to have just a big open drain here. So there's no restriction on drain inside the bed itself, and there's no clean out that you have to do. You can remove this down here and clean out the drain from the bottom, so you don't have to dig out the media bed in order to do maintenance, which is a big advantage, in my opinion. You also get all of the grow space up here in the top. I still don't plant right over the top of the drain, so roots don't immediately grow down into it. And then also here on the inside, I have an inverted net pot. So an upside down net pot sits over the top of the drain and keeps all the media from flowing down into it. Because this is actually just an 1.5 inch drain. So this is actually a good sized drain here. So there's a bulkhead that comes out the bottom. We hook up to the 1.5 inch. Now this is on my flower ring system. I have some flex tube systems also, which we'll take a look at, which are a little different. But for this system, what happens is the water is being pumped in the top, right? So we're not going to worry about our water input right now. Just know it's coming in the top. All this will fill up down here first. Of course, my blue marker's not working as soon as I need it. So all this is going to fill up first. As it fills up, it's going to fill up the media bed. Once it gets full, it's going to fill this all the way up to the top of the U. Now here's the important part. The top of the U is going to be your water level inside your media bed. So in this case, we only look at it 2-dimensionally. You go across from here over to here. That's regardless. This media bed could be 100 feet away. It doesn't matter. It's only the height as far as the water goes. It's filling up this tube, and it fills all this up. We can also have another media bed. We could have, like mine are attached in two. So we could have another media bed over here that's attached here. This would be a T. And then both of these would fill up at the same time. 2 beds, 1 siphon. This would fill up, this would fill up, and again to the same height. So one concern is, like in my system, I built it inside of a garage. Oops, you guys might not be able to see all that. I built it inside of a garage, so it's a little bit sloped. So the way my beds are set up, the water level is not the same. I can't go all the way across and do all of them. So I do two at a time because they're slightly different height. But that's how you can connect multiple beds onto one siphon. It's really the same principle as a bell siphon. As the water fills up, here's our restriction over here. The water fills up. Once it starts, it'll just trickle out over the top here. So it'll just have a little bit of water flow that comes down. In my case, my sump tank is right below it, and it just empties right into that. And then my water pump sits down here, and it pumps water back into the top. So as this fills up, it comes over this first part right here. It'll start coming out just a little bit. So you have to have enough water flow coming into the top of your media beds to overcome this amount of water right here. trickling water out, but it's not actually draining, you probably need more water flow. The other option is to add restriction. If you're maxed out on your pump and you're still not kicking off your siphon, it's not starting, then you might need more water flow. Or if you can't get more water flow, you can do what I do, which is add the ball valve right here. And I can't recommend this enough. It'll make your life easier on the numerous levels. The ball valve will allow you to restrict the flow coming out of here. Here's another tip too that you can do. If you have low water flow, you can put another elbow right here at the bottom, like this. It will turn in. That's another great way to make sure that the disc kicks off, or you can use both. Doesn't really matter. The more you close this valve, the more pressure it'll put back here on the system, and it will allow this to fill up with less of a water flow. Now, also restricts your drain. You're going to drain out slower. So it just depends on how you want to configure it. But let's compare this to a bell siphon, right? We've got a bell siphon, keyword cut. We're cutting slits in this every time we want to add more space. If we cut too many, then we got to take the whole thing apart and make a new sleeve for it. And there are ways of making it adjustable. I know there are definitely different ones out there, but I did not enjoy working with bell siphons, and so that's when I started working with U-siphons, and I find it to be easier. So what happens is once this right here, this air bubble that gets caught in here, so as this water starts filling up in here, an air bubble will form right here, and eventually this air bubble will get pushed out and down here, and this siphon will start. So this will become pressurized, which I use for passive aeration of my tanks. So I have a small gap between my water all the time. So it's always just shooting straight down into there and aerating the water as it flows through. So that's a great passive way to get aeration with I mean, it's not quite like a waterfall. I mean, it is falling, but because it's so pressurized, it creates a lot of air just from doing that. So I don't run any air stones in my system at all. I don't have an air pump. Everything is done through passive aeration. So I have this right here, and then I also have a waterfall on my pump that goes back into the main fish tank to aerate the water going back into there. I also don't have any media filtration. My only media physical filtration are my media beds. So I set them up to filter out as much as possible. I dose them with labs on a regular basis. I feed the fish Bokashi brand once a week, which is just the EM1 Bokashi brand I got from Terragenics, and that really helps break down all of my solids. And then tons of red worms. I have separate red worm bins, and I'm always overpopulating my beds with red worms. So that's kind of the basic U-siphon setup. So I have 2 of these. I have 4 beds and 2 beds on each siphon, and they run like clockwork. I can adjust them if for some reason I want to change the flow. For a while, I had a Venturi set up here, but it was cutting down my water flow a little more than I wanted it to, so I actually just took it out. But when I had the Venturi on there, I just come down here on each of the siphons. When I had less flow, I would restrict this more to get it to run on less flow. So the ability to use the ball valve to adjust the amount of resistance that you need to start your flow will make your life a lot easier. And you won't have to restrict your water flow. If it's too much, you can just let it flow and have the ball valve open more. So rather than putting resistance on your pump, you're just using the ball valve to create resistance on the drain and start your siphon easier. Got any questions over there, Steve?
No, I think that's about it. We do have a couple of questions, but we're about out of time. I think Wendy's about ready here.
Sure.
We'll double check, but how do
I've
people
let Josh
find you?
personally.
How do people find you there, Marty? And maybe we can do a little Q&A during the end of the second half of lunch or something for you.
All right. Yeah, so you can find me at AP Meds, Growing the Fishes podcast, at AP Meds on Instagram, at AP Meds on Patreon. You can find me in a number of different places. Aquaponic Cannabis Growers Group on Facebook, like 7,000 members now. Steve and I do that. So,
Yep.
Yeah, hit me up if you got questions.
All righty. Oh, didn't realize my camera was off. Wendy.